Parshas Bamidbar, and with a commentary of the Alshach. And we're also going to be talking here about time, Zman, how Zman works. So interessant, in the, I mentioned last week in the Shiur, in the Seder Eshe Yisrael, the Parshas of Vilna Gaon, and Rabbi Yitzchak Maltzin, he says that when it says Bereshis, because Chazal have got a big tumult over what does Bereshis mean. Bereshis, it's Bereshis, four Bereshis, that's Yisrael or it's Torah. But he says Bereshis is mamish the beginning. The beginning of Bereshis, the beginning of the Chumash, or the beginning of the Bria, the creation, is the beginning of time. And without time, it's impossible to have the world. Because the world is told in Bechira. If there wasn't time, a past, a present, and future, you would have no Bechira, if you could see. So it's... And then we also mentioned that Rechavia Broida, Rabbi Dessler famously brings him and says, it's not that time passes over a man, but man passes through the times. Do that again. It's not that time passes over a man, but man passes through the times. Normally, if you look in the history book, normally they make time a line, a horizontal line. And then they put little things, 1096, First Crusade, Rashi's time, 1742, whatever it is, and so on and so forth. And then eventually, I'm born there, 120 years later, another line, Yiskadav, Yiskadash, okay? And time goes on. But that's not the way it works. Time is not linear, he says it's circular. In the famous Moshe, he gives us like a spiral staircase. Somebody's going up the spiral staircase, he's coming to the same point again and again and again. You see him, but he's going forward. So as a year turns round, you're coming to a Pesach, which is Man Cherusenu. So there's a koyach of Cherus which is thrown into the world. And you can chap it and take it the same way as the Jewish people did, the Yidden did when they went out from Mitzrayim. Because this is Man Cherusenu. And the same with Man Matan Torah Senu, which we're heading for. On top of that, though, there is, when he says it's not that time passes over a man, but man passes through the times, it also means different epochs, different eras, different times that we go through. Shine. So I had a boch, I told you before, there's a bunch of bochrim come for a share here, it's on a Wednesday, and one of them asked me a question. Very, very sweet boy, very zis, as we say in unser Sprach. And he said, Rabbi, I'm learning Mesilas Yesharim. No, we've all learned Mesilas Yesharim. It was my mus, I should have told him, I forgot to tell him. I learned Mesilas Yesharim for 3 years in Gateshead Yeshiva. It was a half hour Musa Seder and then Mariv. And I learned it for 3 years. And in those 3 years, half an hour I learned it, but it teutnished, it didn't click. And after 3 years, suddenly it clicked. So he said to me like this, I just started learning Mesilas Yesharim, and it's talking about everything's got to be for Hashem, and you should have no rotzen except you're an Eved. Yeah, but then he said, it was quite sweet. But what about me? My things, what I need, what I want, So I smiled, because Mesilas Yesharim is a very, very advanced sefer. It's a very difficult sefer to learn and to understand. And you also have to bear in mind, again, time is also an era. We were talking about the Alshach before, which we've also said. Somebody was malakit the Alshach's parish in Pirkei Avos, and I translated it. I wrote a translation of the Alshach there, and it struck me that a lot of the things that he chose from the Alshach to put into the parish, he'd taken from the Alshach, from his commentary, on the whole of Tanakh. But I thought, and I'm thinking still to do it yet, this should be redone, and a lot of whoever the malakit was, whoever the compiler of this book was, I would have chosen other stuff. Not all, but some of the stuff. Because what works in one generation doesn't work in another generation. In fact, I wrote a translation of Shiur B'toch and the Rechavia, which is just coming out from its second edition. And I've got a very good friend called Rabbi Professor Dr. David Gottlieb, teaches Orsmeach, Ilui. Chassid Shiur. And when he saw the book, he said, "Oh, Yehudi Yoina, this is Nitzkias." And I said, "No, it's 50 years. Because 50 years is a tekufa. It's a yovel, it's an era, it's an epoch. And then after that, it doesn't work anymore. Something have to do a new one. It changes. So Mesilas Yesharim, I don't think, is an appropriate Musa Sefer for beginners. Reb J.B. Soloveitchik, Yoshi Bear Soloveitchik, he writes somewhere. I've got a son who's a big fan of his writing. Not exactly Eine von Unser, but not exactly not Eine von Unser. But Yoshi Bear writes that the original Musa Sforim was the first Gilgul, if you like, of Musa. It was very harsh, very stark. The later Musa Sforim, much different, much more hashkofa, much more, and I can see this as well, like Rabbi Dessler. Yeah. It evolved. So I said to him, "Don't worry, you're here for a long time, please God. You will grow to a madriga, like it's toig, that this will speak to you better, but not now. So you just, Hashem says, Chatzil Hashem, Chatzil Lachem, when it comes to Yontav, etc. So don't drive yourself crazy." Okay. So I remember once Rebal Halpin said that to a friend of mine who was an older fellow coming to Gateshead Yeshiva, when you went to Yeshiva in 1975, you said? So I went to Gateshead at the exact same time. There's another fellow who came, he was an older fellow, and he went to the great Gon Rebal Halpin, who was Rav Schneider. Do you remember Moshe Schneider's Yeshiva in London? Do you heard of that? He's a Talmud of Chofetz Chaim. They were in Frankfurt, but they managed to get out. And when they got out, they ended up in England. So when he went to the Chofetz Chaim, he was, asking his advice. And when they finished talking to him, he said to him, "Moshe, Alamo Metamaisa." Always a story. Everybody likes a story. Anyway, Rebalta, there was a fellow, was an older fellow, and he wanted to get into Gateshead Yeshiva. And they wanted him to get references, so he went to Rebalta Halpin, who knew him. And Rebalta said, he was German, and he had a lisp. He said, "You'd be better getting a letter from a psychiatrist to say that you're balanced." Right? So, and he thought he was joking, but he was German, so they don't joke so much. So he said, "No, I'm being half serious." He said, "Because they'll be scared that the pressure of sitting and learning will drive you crazy." He said, "But you should know it's a shtus, it's nonsense." He said, "Because if you're balanced," this is very, very interesting, if you're balanced, no matter how much pressure somebody puts you under, you won't break. But if you're not balanced, no matter how little pressure they put you under, you will break. Why? Because if you're not balanced, then what happens? I mean, what would a balanced person do saying he's learning in your yeshiva, he's learning in my yeshiva, and it's too much. So we go to the Mashgiach and he says, "Go home for the Shabbos, go home for the weekend." But you go back, it's still too much. So I said, "Okay, in that case, maybe don't learn evening Seder, just learn morning and afternoon Seder. And if it still doesn't work out for you, okay, so you're not cut out to be a mentor. You'll be a businessman and you give a lot of nice money to tzedakah and you'll be a fine yid, that's great." So somebody who's balanced will approach things in that way. But if somebody's not balanced, no matter how much pressure you don't put them under, you'll take on more and more and more and more and you'll break. Interesting. So if you've got a balanced approach to life, we'll see why this works in a second. You've got to say, this is the right thing. It's not for me. No, it's not for me. No problem. Okay. So the Alshach in this week's Parsha, if we look at the pasuk, just remind ourselves, "Yidaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai ba'Oel Moed be'Echad HaKodesh Hasheni v'Shana Hasheni is the Seisar Meretz Yisrael Limor." Now, as we know, what's this all about? Su is Rosh Kodol V'Nasmin Yisrael. They're all going to give Chatzi Shekel, and they're going to be counted. So why are they being counted? So Rashi famously says there, whenever there's a major point in history, in Jewish history, then they're counted, usually after disasters. Yes. And here, the Shekhinah is going to rest on the Mishkan, and therefore they're going to be counted. Okay, let's see what the Alshach has to say about that. Roy Losim Lev, we should consider. Lama hodiena mokam ha'amira, ma shalo osakain bezulis mokam zeh. Why does it emphasize V'yadav Hashem and Moshe Bamidbar Sinai be'oil moed be'echad l'chodesh? So why does it say that? It says be'oil moed. It doesn't say it normally. Omer be'oil moed, and it says oil moed. Ki lo yota ki Shem yidaber moed. It's telling us something we know, that Hashem speaks to them from the oil moed. But the question number 3 is very interesting. Omro be'echad l'chodesh hasheni. Why does it have to go into such detail about the zman, the time, when it's talking about the Shekhinah coming to the Mishkan? No, that's in the second year. Let's say it's in Mitzrayim, when out from Mitzrayim. Why not in the first year? So if you jump to the bottom paragraph here, look what it says here. The reason for this counting, according to Rashi, because as we said, apparently from heaven is going to descend the Shekhinah, and then they're going to be counted. So why is it before Nisan? Nisan atzmai. They should have been counted. And not in Nisan year. Why not in Nisan itself? Why in Iyar? God bin Shimon Yehuda. So that's got to do with, if you look, interesting, of course, we all know the Seder of the Shvatim. So what is God doing between Shimon and Yehuda? Seems to be asking a different question, but it's not. This is a hint about the Inyan of the Degolim, the flags that each of the Shvatim had. Fine. God v'Shimon b'degol machni Reuven. Because this is not talking about the when they were born, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc. It's talking about how they were set up in the Midbar, over the page. So therefore he says that this is incidentally astonishing stuff. You have to get to this bit, this paragraph, but you'll like it. So let's understand this properly. A Medrash Rabbah on Shiurim talks in the Pasuk, it says, a Pasuk, B'digloi alai ahova. Digloi is from the word degel, right? So therefore, I suppose the translation is, your banners, I think that's how they translate it in English, was, for me, a sign of your love for me. Now, what does that mean? This is what the Medrash says. When Klal Yisrael was in Sinai, when Hashem comes down to Har Sinai, it says Hashem Yoba Miriva Baskodesh, they were assembled in 4 camps. And of course, that's what Klal Yisrael is going to be. There's going to be the Mishkan in the middle. Then there's the Machni, there's Aaron's camp. Then there's Machni Levim, and then you get the other. And they are arranged, each of the Shvatim are, because each of when they saw these angels, there was Gabriel in charge of one, and the other is, so they wanted to be like this. They saw that, and they said, Halavai Hashem could live amongst us. Let's see that. Ki Kashay Yisrael b'Sinai Rosh Shechina Shura al Arba Machanas Malachim, Asum Arba Degonim, and they had flags. So where does the idea of Degolim come from? As far as the Torah is concerned, Malachim. We saw Malachim with flags, and we wanted flags. Degol Michael, Degol Gavriel, Degol Neuriel, Degol Raphael. When it's Ava, on that Ataiva, but Omro, Mi Yitin B'Tishra Shechina Alena Ba'arba Machanes. If only it could be that was us. And that's what it means. The fact that he gave us the Golim, that we were going to become the Machne, in which instead of we were going to replace the Malachim, and Hashem will dwell with us. Ki as God lo hachnosam b'schus atayru l'lulush is kalkulu b'karav masa egel, which, and that's what's going to happen, except earlier on, if we'd not made a mess of it with the Meiser of the Egel. Okay, now he says, but Misha nitaken shahoya al-mochus Yom Kippur, and when we were forgiven for the Egel, the day after Yom Kippur, Shabbat beluchas shnias besuras ma'isa mishkan. So when they got a second set of luchas, and the semen, or part of the tikkun, is that you're now going to have the Mishkan. It's a sort of like b'diavad, of course, because Hashem was supposed to be dwelling as apple pekin. Ad Rosh Chodesh Nisan Shebeshon Hashenis, and they were busy with getting this Mishkan project underway up until the second year, let's say Meretz Hashem, V'shloshim Yom Achar Kamas HaMishkan, and a month after Kamas HaMishkan, Bahu Yisbarach Lahashim Lahem Shalosam Lahasha Shkinas Behem. So and then their hope, their ambition was fulfilled. The Shekhinah is going to come and dwell. Behem Asuim Arba Degolim, and then 4 Degolim, Mein Mashahai B'Malach Hasharis, 4 camps of various clouds from. Fine. But now, Vahu, Ki Lama Shebamidbar Har Sinai, Bo Lahem Hashpo Shalo Ba'adroga. Wow.
What's the question?
The question is, no, he's talking about, he mentioned, he was Meramas before about the fact that Klal Yisrael would already had the Shekhinah dwelling on them, living amongst them, if they hadn't messed up with the Eglazov. Right. So now he's going to talk about the Eglazov. Since, the question is, why did they make the Mishkan? He says, because when they came face to face with Hashem, it was too much for them, and consequently, that's why they messed up. Sha'al kein lo yochlo lisbol, ki shasa alehem shkina v'ruach nevuah ba'kaitz. Now this is astonishing. It was too much, and therefore suddenly they're face to face with Hashem Yisborach. It was too much, and they messed up as a consequence. Now, there's obviously a big question with that. Hashem made them. He brought them to that point. If it was too much, why did he do it? Did he set them up to fall? It seems to be. And Be'emes, the truth is, yeah.
Did?
Yes. So he's not going to talk about this, and we're not going to talk about it. Just the headline is, one of the question, that when the Alshach goes into this in depth, the Gemara says that even the behemoths of tzaddikim don't go and graze in somebody else's field. Okay. So why wasn't it that Hashem, therefore, if he protects tzaddikim, why didn't he protect this is the Dordea, these are all tzaddikim. So why didn't he protect them? All he needs to do is to tell Moshe to come down an hour earlier, and then he came down. Right? And that's the end of the problem. So the Gemara famously says in this, if you live in a Dora in which you despair that the Dora will ever be worthy of Hashem's bringing the Mashiach, or if Rahman al-Islam, says the Gemara, you do something, an individual Jew does something which is terrible, and he despairs of ever being forgiven, you're supposed to remember there was a Dora that was so bad Hashem proposed wiping them out and starting again from Moshe, but yet forgave them. On David HaMelech, what he did, which was, of course, huge Chilul Hashem, Kabiyachol, Apopikein, an individual can be forgiven. Hashem allows this to happen in part to let us know, don't despair, even if the Dar is Shvach, is weak, or an individual is weak, you can still be forgiven. There's obviously a lot more to say in that, but let's just do a little bit more what he says. And then, it was too much. They actually died. It because it overwhelmed them. Okay, so what did Hashem do? So now that actually he's going to have his Shekhinah living amongst them, which they want to do, the last time it overwhelmed them. So what does he do? He brings up Madrega Acham Madrega. So, and then he's going to go through it. It's not straight away, it's a year later, they're working and creating the Mishkan, and then there's going to be camps set up further away, so it's not, and we'll blow them away. So in other words, what the Alshach is saying here, there's a time which will be Matzliach, and a time which is not Matzliach, which is what I was saying about that Bocher before. There's a time, 3 years in my case, before I got Mrs. Hashem. And I remember once, I think I mentioned it once in the Shiur, I remember I was stuck on a Rambam. Well, I had a kasha in the Rambam, and I couldn't figure it out. I looked all over and asked. And then something like, I think 20 years later, the answer, and not only that, the question was not a question in the first place, but I understand. Sometimes you have to mature and learn more and understand more and experience more before it all comes together. Right, so if it's too quick, too soon, not at the right time, you're going to be in trouble. But that's part, if it's a Musa drosha, if Hashem allows this to happen, the Egel Azov to happen, in order to teach us a huge Musa lesson for all the generations, the fact that he remedies the situation by schlepping it out till a year later, and it's Madrega Acha Madrega, not too much. There's also Musa drosha for us as well. Fine. Now here's going. At this point, you'll think I've gone mad, it's going to be based on the Rabbi Dessler, but we've talked about time, and we said Bereshis Borag Elokim. It means he started time. Without time, the world wouldn't exist. Does time exist? I don't know if you've ever thought about this. Does time exist? Well, of course time exists, right? Shachris, Mincha, Mariv, we're men. We're familiar with what time is. How would you describe time? How would you define time? A way of measuring things that change. The Rambam famously says that apart from those who had Ruach HaKodesh or Nevi'us, nobody reached an intellectual level like Aristotle. Right? Amazing. Never told you this?
That's what Rambam says. That's what Rambam says, yes.
Yeah, so says Rav Simcha Wasserman. It's actually an amazing thing. So he asked the obvious question. So how come he didn't believe in God? If he was so great, how come he didn't believe in God? So he says, very interesting, he was a philosopher. What does philosophy mean? It's two Greek words, and it means a lover. Philos means to love. Philosemitic means you like Jews. Very rare word. But there's a city in America called Philadelphia, which I think you're familiar with. And that means the city of brotherly love. So it's a Greek word. So he was a philosopher, and that means a lover of wisdom. Fine, he's a lover of wisdom. But he was also something else. He was a lover of, he was a philanderer, a lover of woman. He was a Baal Taiva. Because the way the Simcha Wasserman asked the question, how could it be that if the same Rambam who says nobody had an intellectual ability like Aristotle, and yet to believe in God is a mitzvah, so how come therefore that we ask a 12-year-old girl or a 13-year-old boy, as soon as they're bas or bar mitzvah, to keep the mitzvahs? That means they got to believe that Hashem exists. But the greatest mind who ever lived was Aristotle, and they believe in God. So he says, because he was indeed a lover of knowledge, but he loved something more, and that was he was a Baal type, Baalsness. Young woman, old woman, married woman, single woman, didn't make any difference to him, right? He was just a groba. Therefore, if you've got a particular bias to one direction, suppose he discovers he's thinking about morality, and make it a bar graph. These bar graphs you have, and you get it's like a square like that. You make a square like that, and there's another one. So that's how much money I've got, and that's how much money Mr. Reichman had. Or Steve Jobs, these people. Okay, so if that's our bar graph, if that's how much he loves, I'll make it easier actually, more like that, Andrew. If that's how much he loves wisdom, and that is how much he loves Noshim, but the wisdom shows him that he shouldn't be living this immoral life, but that's what he wants, then of course. So, but the interesting thing is, you'll find this in Sefer Seder Hadoros. This is great. It says how at the end, the Sof Yomov, Aristotle became a Ger Tzedek, converted to Judaism, and tried his best to uproot everything he'd said before. The Greeks, incidentally, say he went mad at the end of his life. But of course, from a Greek point of view, to become a Yid, he must have got that right. But it's interesting, it says Sof Yomov, Because what happens to a man's tithers at the end of his life? They go down. So instead of that being knowledge...
Depends how old he was.
Sorry?
Depends how old he was.
He was quite old.
Well, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So therefore, it could go down. In other words, what we're expecting from a boy or a girl is simply to control your tithers, and then the truth will come shining through. Okay. But anyway, leaving that aside, how does time work? Does time exist? So we can talk. Let's go to Greece. So here's a book which I quite like. It's called A Brief History of the Philosophy of Time. Right. So I read weird books. And here he talks about the Eleatic school. It was 500 years before the what they call the Common Era. 500 years. So there's an island in off Italy called Elia, and that was controlled at the time. But the Greeks used to control Italy, and of course the Romans eventually controlled Greece. And there was a school of philosophers there, and they denied that time existed. To which you think, so they were drunk, they were shagoyim. Not so clear cut, right? And then there was, of course, they had misnagdim against them. And one of them was Aristotle, Baruch Hashem. But it's interesting, let me ask you, which of these two shitas you think is more Talmudic, or maybe even Talmudic? Right, okay. So, one of the famous members of this school that said time doesn't exist. So what do you do about the fact you see people getting old? And, apples... I'll tell you the answer, how they answered that in a second. But what they said was, it's only an illusion. It doesn't really happen. Because I can bring... I don't know if they used the thumbs in ancient Greece. So there was somebody called Zeno, Xeno. He was a great philosopher. Anyway, Parmenides was his Rebbe, etc. They lived a long time ago, and he had something called Zeno's paradoxes. Zeno's paradoxes. Okay, so one was called the dichotomy, the other one's called Achilles and the tortoise, and there's another one whose name I forgot, probably over here. Oh yeah. The arrow. We don't need to go into this. Let's just talk about the dichotomy, okay? There's a diagram as well. So here we go. Suppose someone, call her Atlanta. We're from Jews, so we'll call him George. Or, what's a good Greek name? Stavros. Okay. Suppose someone called Stavros intends to walk at a steady pace to the grocery store down the block. Look at a little diagram of this, okay? Okay. In order to arrive at the store, Stavros must first cover half the distance to the store. That makes sense, right? Yeah. So there's Stavros, there's the store. Yeah. So if he wants to get there, first of all, he's got to get to there, obviously. Right. Super. So that leaves him with a certain distance yet to cover. That distance, okay. In order to reach the store from there, he must again cover half the remaining distance. Get to there. And another half the remaining distance, right? Now, the problem with that is, the distance... We've now cut that distance in half. And then we've cut it in a quarter. And then we've cut it again. How many times can I cut that distance? An infinite. An infinite, right. That means to say there's an infinite distance from here to here. But the time, therefore, he can't. Stavros can't live infinitely. So he's going to die. He's never going to get there. Right. So right? And there's other rayas as well, which we won't go into. However, Aristotle turns around and says the following thing. Good. He says, page 15, yeah. So he says, I love this, and this is so surprising from Aristotle. Aristotle concludes that Zeno's paradoxes rest in confusing time, which is an abstract unit system, that's he's splitting up like this, and he says it's infinite, with change, a phenomenon that can be measured. You can see it. To cut a long story short, do you know what solipsism is? We're still in Greece. There was another school of thought they were called solipsists. And they argued that nothing exists. right? And I can prove it to you. Right? I know that I exist because the famous French philosopher René Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. How good's your Latin? I think, therefore I am. No, I know I am. Right? But how do I know that you exist? I used to have fun teaching my university students this one. Right? How do I know that you exist? Right? So you'll say, you can see me. No. You see, I'll make them up. Here's the mashal I usually use. I live in a different planet, in outer space. And what we do for relaxation is we lie in a bed and they put a hat on our head. Actually, we've got two heads. I put a hat on our heads and it plays us, like in the sleep, and it plays us. We're only there for 10 minutes, but you, like an incredibly sophisticated dream where you imagine absolutely a whole lifetime, and I'm a rabbi and I live on planet Earth and I've got people coming to my shiurim and I'm giving a shiur. It's being videoed for Torah anytime. Right. But 10 minutes later, I get up, take the hats off my heads, and off I go. Right. So I can see you, but that's what the computer, it's a big computer, is making me see. So my students used to get a bit annoyed with this, and they say, well, I touch you, you can feel it. No. The computer is stimulating the nerves, and so I'm there, okay? So then, I remember one said, I'll punch you in the nose, it'll hurt. I said, no, you're right, it will hurt, because that's what the computer, all right. So how do you prove to somebody that you exist? I know I exist. How do I know that you're not in a mirage, a computer program? And the answer is to this, you can't. You can't prove to me that anybody exists. Incidentally, there is, do you know what OCD is? Yeah. What do we have time? I've got to remember you got to go. OCD is a terrible, I once dealt with somebody who suffered from existential OCD. He believed that he didn't exist. Very, very hard. Frim boy. Anyway, Aristotle's answer to this is, you know what? It doesn't matter. Yeah, you're right. Philosophically, you can make up a clever answer, but my eyes show me clearly that there is such a thing as time, and an abstract idea doesn't defeat reality. Make sense? Okay. What does Rabbi Dessler have to say about this? Rabbi Dessler in Michtam Leo, in Chelik Dalet, page 111, but you're running out of time, so I'll quickly tell you this outside. He says there's a mistake that is made that time is past, present, and future. He says it's not. That is part of the illusion that this world has in order that we have Bechira. But in actual fact, there is no such thing as past, present, and future. It's all there, right? In fact, there's a girl in Nebuch. I teach in a seminary. There's a girl, beginning of the year, her father died just recently, and when I went there last night, the grandmother had died as well. Poor girl. In one of my books, I wrote a book called The Little Book for Big Worries, helping people who are seriously sick. But even though I wrote the book for people who are seriously sick, helping people who are seriously sick, the people who are seriously sick, it really spoke to them. And almost no month goes by without a complete stranger phoning me up and saying thank you. Well, my father was sick, and my mother was sick, and my wife was sick, and my husband was sick, and my children were sick, and that's the book that got us through. And the bit that they like the most is, I say that when a person is lying on their deathbed, surrounded by their family, you're right, they're all crying and stuff, and then he closes his eyes for the last moment. When he opens his eyes again, upstairs, a few seconds later, who's beside him? The exact same people that were down here before. Because time only exists in this world. The appearance of time only exists. So I asked you before, in this crazy Greeks here, who's right? Zeno or Aristotle? We would say Aristotle. But if you want to go really, really deep, the Torah is more like Zeno. That time doesn't exist. It's just an illusion in order to give us Bechira. There's a lot more to say in Rabbi Dessler than that. But we don't live our lives according to abstract ideas, as Aristotle said. Reality. For you and me, our time on this world is real. We're supposed to do things on it like putting tefillin in the morning and davening mincha and counting the Omer very shortly when we go to Mariv, etc. That's reality. We've got a thing to achieve in this journey because you're sent here at a time. It's not that time passes over a man. Man passes through the times, but we're sent here for our tachlis in this time. And that's what we have to go on with. There's interesting ideas. But if it's too much for you, these ideas, there's got no tachlis. If there's no tachlis for you whatsoever, if you don't get it, don't drive yourself nuts. Maybe you'll get it one day. Maybe it'll be a chelik of your avodah one day. But if it's not, don't drive yourself crazy. Be balanced. Your job is Tariag mitzvahs.